It's November 21st here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with Ukraine's launch of UK-supplied cruise missiles into Russia. Ukraine has fired long-range British Storm Shadow missiles at Russian targets for the first time, just a day after launching U.S.-made ATACMS into Russia, which made the U.S. shut down its embassy in Kyiv. A UN General Assembly committee on Wednesday adopted a resolution on North Korean human rights for the 20th consecutive year. Also, for the first time, the regime's public renouncement of the reunification of the two Koreas was mentioned in the annual resolution. The U.S. on Wednesday vetoed a UN Security Council resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, citing it doesn't guarantee an immediate release of hostages held by Hamas. Ukraine fired long-range British Storm Shadow missiles at targets within Russia for the first time on Wednesday, while the U.S. has decided to give Ukraine anti-personnel landmines on top of allowing the use of its ATACMS missiles in Russia. Our Park Kwon-woo reports.
Ukraine has used UK-supplied long-range missiles for the first time in its war against Russia. According to Reuters, an official speaking on condition of anonymity confirmed that British Storm Shadow cruise missiles with a range of 250 kilometers were launched on Wednesday against targets in Russia. Fragments of the missiles were reportedly found in the Kursk region, where North Korean troops are deployed. The attack comes a day after Ukraine fired U.S. ATACMS missiles for the first time into Russian territory, after their use was approved by U.S. President Joe Biden this week. The British government declined to comment about the use of its long-range missiles, but according to the BBC, the UK's Defense Secretary had been in contact with officials in Ukraine on Tuesday night. The UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer had hinted at support for Ukraine during the recent G20 summit in Brazil.
We have stood with Ukraine from the start, and I've been doubling down in my clear message that we need to ensure that Ukraine has what is needed for as long as is needed to win this war against Putin.
Also on Wednesday, the U.S. said it would support Ukraine with anti-personnel landmines in a reversal of its current policy. The decision was followed by backlash from humanitarian organizations over concerns about the threat such weapons pose to civilians. However, the U.S. State Department said the landmines are comparatively safe as they become inert after a period of time. Also on Wednesday, countries including the U.S. temporarily shut their embassies in Kyiv amid the threat of Russian attacks inside Ukraine.
Saw the security alert that went out early this morning, overnight our time. The embassy put that alert out based on a possible threat of a significant attack on Kyiv, something that we take very seriously and led to the temporary change in posture at the embassy.
But the U.S. officials said their embassy will return to normal operations on Thursday. Park Kwon-woo, Arirang News.
A committee under the United Nations has passed a resolution on the human rights issue in North Korea for the 20th year in a row. Our Peunji has the details.
The United Nations Third Committee, which handles human rights and social affairs, has adopted a resolution on North Korean human rights. It was adopted by consensus by 61 countries, including South Korea, at a meeting in New York on Wednesday local time. The committee has been adopting the resolution on the human rights situation in North Korea every year since 2005. This year's resolution not only contains a united message from the international community urging the overall improvement of human rights in North Korea, but also includes concerns about new areas that were not part of previous resolutions. First, it expressed concerns about the possible negative impact the human rights situation could have on separated families, noting that North Korea announced earlier in January that it would no longer pursue reunification with the South. And second, the paper also urged the North to ensure the right to freedom of thought and religion, and the right to freedom of opinion and expression, by reforming all practices and laws that suppress these rights. It also called on the regime to permit the establishment of independent newspapers and other media. South Korea's Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations said during Wednesday's meeting that it's already well known the North provides zero freedom of expression and severe punishment for merely watching South Korean dramas.
It is with a heavy heart, however, that there has been no no improvement, but rather deterioration in North Korea's systematic, widespread, and gross human rights violations, which amount to crimes against humanity.
South Korea's foreign ministry said in a statement that it welcomes the committee's adoption of the resolution and said it hopes discussions on the human rights situation in North Korea will continue to take place actively at the United Nations. Peunji, Arirang News.
Now, a Gaza ceasefire resolution at the UN Security Council failed to pass after a veto from a permanent member, the United States. This is already the fourth time Washington has used its veto power. Our Isung explains.
A UN Security Council draft resolution was put forward by 10 non-permanent members on Wednesday, calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. For a resolution to be adopted, it must receive at least 9 votes in favor, with no vetoes by any of the UNSC permanent members. However, despite receiving 14 votes in favor of the draft resolution, it failed to pass due to 1 veto from a permanent member, the United States. According to the U.S. envoy to the UN, the veto comes as it was believed the draft resolution would not have secured the release of hostages.
We made clear throughout negotiations we could not support an unconditional ceasefire that failed to release the hostages. Because, as this Council has previously called for, a durable end to the war must come with the release of the hostages. These two urgent goals are inextricably linked. This resolution abandoned that necessity, and for that reason, the United States could not support it.
The veto was still met with major backlash despite the explanation from the U.S. ambassador to the UN. The draft resolution does demand the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. However, the U.S. felt the language was not strong enough, adding that the ceasefire was not on the condition of the release of hostages. Wood also added that the draft failed to condemn Hamas for the October 7th terrorist attack. Meanwhile, after visiting Beirut, U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein is headed to Israel to continue negotiations on an Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire. He's expected to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Thursday, as the Lebanese government and Hezbollah accepted a U.S.-led draft proposal. However, details of the ceasefire proposal are still unclear, and it remains to be seen whether Israel would also agree to the agreement after Hochstein's visit. 이승재, Arirang News.
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has tapped former acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker as the next U.S. ambassador to NATO, calling him a strong warrior and loyal patriot. Trump said Whitaker would ensure U.S. interests are advanced and defended, adding that Washington's relationship with NATO will be strengthened. The nomination comes despite Whitaker's background in law enforcement and not foreign policy. He had been considered for Attorney General, but the position was instead given to Matt Gaetz earlier this month. President Yoon landed in Seoul early this morning after a week in Latin America to attend the APEC and G20 summits. His diplomacy stretched beyond the summit agenda. Our Oh Soo-young wraps up the major outcomes of his trip.
President Yoon's week-long trip to Latin America featured South Korea's multidimensional diplomacy as he reinforced bilateral and minilateral partnerships to tackle global challenges. Coming at a significant time in geopolitics, with former US President Donald Trump set to return to the White House in January, as well as Russia and North Korea's military cooperation, all eyes were on Yoon's key bilateral summits on the sidelines of the APEC Summit in Peru. Amid concerns that a second Trump term could undermine America's network of alliances, the South Korean leader held a trilateral and separate bilateral meetings with US President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. To preserve Seoul, Washington and Tokyo's three-way partnership on deterring North Korea and tackling challenges to regional peace and prosperity, the leaders agreed to launch a trilateral secretariat to institutionalize their agreements made at Camp David last year. The South Korean leader also held a rare sit-down with Chinese President Xi Jinping for the first time in 2 years, signaling progress in their relations. Yoon called on Beijing to play a constructive role in squeezing North Korea as the regime's nuclear and missile threat continues to grow. Still, with tensions expected to rise between Washington and Beijing, Yoon made it clear that choosing between its closest ally and biggest trading partner is a false dilemma. He told Brazilian media that while Seoul will anchor its foreign policy on the Korea-US alliance, it aims for communication and a constructive partnership with China. Another key outcome of Yoon's trip to Lima was his bilateral summit with Peruvian President Dina Boluarte as he marked his first official trip to a Latin American country. The two sides inked deals on strengthening cooperation on defence, minerals, infrastructure and ICT as comprehensive strategic partners. Yoon also met with the leaders of Brunei and Vietnam for the first time and the Canadian Prime Minister for their 6th summit. During the G20 summit in Brazil, Yoon also held a minilateral meeting with the leaders of MICTA, Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey and Australia, reaffirming their support for principles of international law, multilateralism and international cooperation amid growing conflicts in the world. Finally, Yoon's multilateral diplomacy aimed to enhance South Korea's role as a global pivotal state, contributing to global growth and governance, leveraging its experience of turning from a war-torn country into an advanced IT powerhouse.
The central themes of the APEC and G20 meetings were promoting inclusivity and growth and building a just world and sustainable planet, both addressing humanity's sustainable future, a goal attainable only through shared growth between advanced and developing economies.
Yoon highlighted Seoul's role as a bridge of prosperity and a green ladder linking developing and advanced economies by sharing its IT solutions for social inclusion, contributions to beat poverty and hunger, and efforts to promote an inclusive green transition. Wrapping up his multilateral summitry, President Yoon assured that South Korea will uphold its commitments and responsibilities, especially as its southern city of Gyeongju hosts the APEC Summit next year. He introduced the summit's theme of building a sustainable tomorrow, connect, innovate, prosper. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, Rio de Janeiro.
And then now, how successful or fruitful were the APEC Summit and the G20 Summit on the global level? Let's recap the past with Professor Han Shuttle. Good morning.
Good morning, Dami.
So let's start with the G20 Summit over in Rio. Is it safe to say one of the biggest outcomes of this year's edition is the launch of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty? What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting and positive step. This G20 summit in particular was hosted, of course, in the Global South with Brazil. Next year, it's apparently scheduled to be hosted by South Africa. And that's a big difference, actually, between the G20, this larger group, and, say, the G7, you know, the smaller group of countries, mainly in the Global North, that meet every year as well. And I think Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, was very keen to make a statement at this summit that we could see more attention to issues in countries that still struggle for a lot of poverty. So there are some interesting steps in the alliance. Cash transfers for up to 500 million people around the world in developing countries that maybe don't have quite enough to eat. Malnutrition as well among school students is being taken on. School meals for 150 million students has been pledged in support from a variety of countries, as well as some support for small-scale farmers. So the big global NGOs are framing this as a positive step. And they are also calling for it to be a first step, not for it to be a final step. Oxfam in particular is suggesting that there's need for even more investments to get at agriculture itself and to promote more small-scale farming, promote more land rights in developing countries, promote more gender equity. So hopefully this will start a larger conversation on a lot of kinds of more systemic changes as well that could follow this sort of agreement and create more food for people around the world.
Right. Sounds like a tangible, start to the project, a global project. But at the same time, the G20 member countries sounded a note of, caution over protectionism regarding trade ahead of the launch of the incoming Trump administration, didn't they?
You bet, because Donald Trump, the incoming U.S. president, is already talking about tariffs, in some cases very steep tariffs, particularly on goods imported into the U.S. From China. And that prompted Chinese leader Xi Jinping to have a series of one-on-one meetings at the summit with presidents and prime ministers from a variety of countries, really urging them, I think lobbying them or pleading with them not to take the same kinds of protective steps, so to speak. In a way, it was kind of odd to see China, a communist country still, out there at the forefront of trying to position itself as a free trade country, as a country following what we would call neoliberalism. So they're really trying to, I think, protect their own industries, their own export industries, by trying to maintain better arrangements with other countries if they're going to have a less favorable arrangement with the U.S. So definitely the possibility, or the likelihood now, or inevitability, I guess, of the second Trump administration was a kind of shadow that was hanging over this summit.
Right, China trying to fit in a rare move. Now, of course, Ukraine's sovereignty and the denunciation of Russia-North Korea military collaboration also topped the summit. But Russia's foreign minister, who attended the meeting on behalf of Putin, left the summit with a stronger warning about the war in Ukraine. Now, it looks like Russia is nowhere close to ending its crisis, doesn't it?
Yeah, the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, which in many ways involves a lot of other countries, including G20 countries, was another dark cloud, you could say, over this summit. And, the Russia over the last few days has put out a new doctrine, supposedly, on its, prospective use of nuclear weapons, something that it's been threatening ever since it invaded Ukraine as a kind of blackmail in February of 2022. And what they're saying now is, even if there are conventional attacks on Russia, basically attacks on Russia with non-nuclear weapons, such as the long-range missiles provided by the U.S. that Ukraine has been firing in to Russia this week, and Ukraine's also now been firing in missiles provided by Britain as well. Russia is saying, and they're warning in advance, that they are going to treat any attack on their territory, even if it's not a nuclear attack, if the attack is coming and aided by a state that is a nuclear state, then Russia will treat that state aiding them as also a party to the attack, a joint assault on Russia. So that's a kind of ominous statement. It's not necessarily a threat from Russia that they're actually going to respond to that kind of attack with nuclear weapons, but it suggests that Russia itself, as its own territory starts to get attacked by Ukraine, that they will consider at least escalating further, and possibly escalating beyond what would be seen as proportionate. So that's an unresolved point of tension that really got no further in terms of progress at the summit, unfortunately.
Professor Shadow, before I let you go, a notable happening during the summit this year, U.S. President Joe Biden was tardy and he missed the so-called, family photo of the summit with the world leaders. It was unusual that the world leaders, didn't wait for Biden, considering Washington's status in the international arena. Is it because he's on the way out of the White House?
Well, it's unusual, and it's a bit odd. It wasn't just Joe Biden in the end. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni also missed that first photo, and almost opened up the question who was snubbing whom here. Were certain world leaders unhappy with the way the summit was going and they weren't showing up for the photo? Or on the other hand, were they the ones getting snubbed since the rest of the crowd didn't wait for them to come? I think it was a real headache, actually, for the host of the summit, Brazil's President Lula da Silva. He ended up scheduling a second photo shoot. It was overnight our time, and they did take that second picture with all of them there. But President da Silva of Brazil also canceled the final press conference where they would typically announce the results of the G20 summit. So even though there was that food security initiative that came out of the G20 this time around, it seemed that on all the larger issues in terms of trade, in terms of also Israel-Palestine, in terms of Russia and Ukraine, and even the positioning, but maybe in a way a kind of tension between some of the countries of the global north and the countries of the global south, it seems like all these fault lines or fissures are going to be lingering into next year's summit. So the leaders of South Africa have their work cut out for them as they get ready to host next year's G20.
Professor Shadow, thanks so much for your time and your insight this morning. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you for having me, Dami. You too. Take care.
Good morning, I'm Kim Xiang, and this is The World Now. Now, violence has escalated in the Haitian capital, Port-au-Prince, with the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner saying Wednesday that at least 150 people were killed and some 100 injured in the past week alone. Now, difficult conditions continue in Haiti, with some 80% of the Haitian capital still controlled by well-armed gangs, where civilians are routinely being targeted. Around 20,000 people have also been forced to flee their homes since a coalition of gangs began pushing for total control of the country's capital on November 11th. UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk expressed grave concern, saying that some 4 million residents of Port-au-Prince are practically being held hostage by an alliance of Haitian gangs controlling all the main roads in and out of the capital. Now, while a Kenya-led international force has been deployed in Haiti to support the Haitian military and police, the UN Human Rights Office estimates some 700,000 people are now displaced across the country. It also said that up to Wednesday, 4,544 deaths have been caused by gang violence, with another 2,060 people injured. A powerful storm known as a bomb cycle slammed the northwest United States and parts of Canada in Tuesday night to early Wednesday, leaving some 650,000 without power and at least 2 people dead. Schools in western parts of Washington state have temporarily cancelled classes as falling trees killed at least 2 people in the state overnight. A bomb cyclone occurs when a storm rapidly intensifies over a short period of time due to a rapid fall in central air pressure. Now, gusts of up to 124 kilometers per hour were recorded in Washington state, while the coast of British Columbia saw winds of up to 163 kilometers per hour. Now, in Washington state, over 650,000 homes or businesses lost power by Wednesday morning, while 140,000 were cut off in British Columbia and more than 24,000 were left without power in California. The cyclone is predicted to move towards northern California, with strong winds and heavy rains expected to continue through Friday in the affected regions. India continues to see hazardous levels of air pollution, leading the capital's environment minister to order half of its government workers to work from home on Wednesday. According to IQ Air data on Wednesday morning, New Delhi ranked as the world's most polluted city with a very unhealthy level of 227 on the Air Quality Index. Delhi Environment Minister Gopal Rai said that 50% of the Delhi government staff will be working from home, with the exception of those working in departments providing essential services. All schools in Delhi have also been temporarily shut down to prevent pollution-related illnesses, while Stage 4 pollution curbs have been imposed banning operation of trucks and vehicles. Now, lastly, a woman has been charged with hate crime in the U.S. after a video recording an altercation at a cafe in Illinois went viral. 64-year-old Alexandra Shustakiewicz has been charged with 2 counts of hate crime, which are a Class 4 felony, and a single count of misdemeanor disorderly conduct after she was seen in an altercation with a Palestinian man and his pregnant wife, attempting to pour a drink on the man and raising her hand to assault the victim. Now, police said that Shustakiewicz confronted the man before his wife began recording the encounter. Illinois Downers Grove Chief of Police Michael DeVries said that the assailant's behavior is not and will never be tolerated in our community.
It feels more comfortable this morning. Daily lows in Seoul are about 4 degrees higher than at the same time yesterday. And the capital woke up to the spotty rain, which will expand to the rest of the central regions and northern Jeollabuk-do province. The amount will be less than 5 millimeters through late this afternoon. But the main issue for the weather will be the dust levels. The capital area and Chungcheongdo provinces will have bad air quality all day, while some of the southern provinces and west of Gangwon-do will see dust levels rising in the afternoon. But it should not be bad enough to be deeply concerned. Now, checking on today's highs now. Afternoon highs will be 1 to 5 degrees higher this afternoon. Seoul gets up to 14 degrees. Daegu and Gwangju topping out at 15 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Skies should get sunnier for southern provinces. Now, morning lows drop down to norms tomorrow, but highs will remain in double digits through early next week, with sunnier skies in the forecast from Friday. Well, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And that wraps up our morning edition of Arirang News. Thanks for watching.